on the conversation, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers if you'd like to do so. But next Wednesday night, we're going to have a question and answer time, Bible questions, Christian life questions, application lessons, whatever's on your mind, and I'll try to have some kind of a formative answer for you. If you have a question you'd like to have addressed for sure, but you don't want to necessarily ask it, just email it to me during the week. But that'll be next Wednesday night. Then 2 weeks from tonight is the Awana Awards program, which we're going to have over in the gym. We're going to have it at 7. We're going to ask people to come to acknowledge the work of the children and the Awana workers. We'll have, I think they're going to have pizza. We'll have a pizza dinner and then watch the awards. It'll about an hour total time it'll take. And then when school's done, which will be about 2 or 3 weeks after that, school finishes the last week of May, we're going to do a series in the summer on Wednesday nights where Amy is going to have something for the children every Wednesday night, all summer long. That won't be a Awana program. It's going to be called Youth for Truth Sleuths. The Youth for Truth is the Bible study program she has for TCA kids here 3 days a week during lunchtime. So she's hoping to draw some of them in. She has 45 or more kids doing that. And to have them come for the summer in a sort of a fun, stretched out VBS thing over 8 Wednesday nights. So while they're doing that, they're going to feed them, then do that. We're going to probably have meet out in the lobby and have some kind of meal out there, and then we're going to, if we can do it with our video equipment, we're going to start a series that's called. It's from the Bible Project. It's a fantastic overall portrayal of Scripture that I'll show you in church first. And there's an 8-minute version that has the book of Ecclesiastes on it. And it explains what Ecclesiastes is all about, what is the true message of it, what's the philosophy and the approach of the writer. Well, it's just done so simply and so brilliantly at the same time that I just found it very engaging. So I purchased the HD videos for all 66 books of the Bible, and then you get this coffee table book that goes with it that has all the charts. When you see it in church, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's just incredibly clever. A bunch of young guys and ladies got together and over 4 or 5 years put this together in a new, innovative, modern teaching style where the chart is hand-drawn and it just sort of unfolds in front of you as they're talking. It's a great summary. It's a great way to get a good Bible knowledge. And if we can work it out, we're going to do that. Even if we have to eat and there, then come in here for the video. And then we discuss it. Each video is about 8 to 15 minutes long, but it generates such good discussion and ways to look at the particular book of the Bible. We're going to start that in the summer, I believe, when we do the Youth for Truth Sleuths on Wednesday night. And that'll start, I think it's the last Wednesday of May or the first Wednesday of June, one of the two. So keep that in mind if you would, but this will be the last in this series on taking a stand and while reaching out. And there'll be some updates from what I printed out because I was at the bioethics conference a couple of weeks ago. They addressed, again, some of the pitfalls of advanced directives and what they're now finding in terms, well, they knew this was happening all along, but now the documentation is so strong that the 2 speakers in the panel that were presenting this had a recommendation for an approach that I came to about 8 years ago, and it's the approach that I take, which many of you probably already have, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Let's have a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we do thank you that we have the opportunity to discuss not only the relevance of our lives, but the way in which we might die and what happens to our financial legacy, what happens to our spiritual legacy, our relational legacy, that we will glean real wisdom from this as our culture has changed so dramatically in the last 30 years that we'll open our hearts and minds to the potential good of advanced directives and what they can protect and how we might best pursue that. And may you lead this discussion in Jesus' name. Amen. If you'll look on your first sheet where it says advanced directives across the top, that is the general overall umbrella term for all the different various forms of communicating ahead of time what you want done with yourself if you are unable to communicate. either because you're incapacitated or you're incompetent. Both of those are legal definitions. That means you're in a state where medical procedures are being recommended or need to be done to you, and somebody has to decide to allow them to transpire or not. Well, if you're incapacitated, where you've been knocked out, you're in a coma, you're PVS, or you're unable to communicate, or you can communicate but you're incompetent, your brain is not thinking correctly. Who makes these decisions? And if you'll keep in the back of your mind, somebody always makes the decisions. There's no way a decision is not going to be made. So as your focus, Jeff, would you mind giving them a copy? Your desire is the right decision being made that you believe is right? Some of the options we now have available to us would be certainly extra biblical, outside of biblical morality or theology, because these opportunities, these options, these therapies and treatments weren't available not only 2,000 years ago, some of them weren't available 20 years ago, much less 50 and 100 years ago. So some of the challenges that we face in Christianity is how do we face death in the modern world? When I was a young boy, my grandmother, she basically passed away in the back bedroom over a period of weeks. And most people had an elderly grandmother or somebody living in the house until they passed away. That was the way people died for a long time in America. But beginning in about the 60s, and then it just rapidly increased through the 90s, death in America became less a family and a natural experience and became a sterile hospital clinical experience, where most deaths happen in a institution or a facility. They don't happen at home. The incidences of dropping dead and dying without having to go to the hospital are much rarer than they used to be because of medical intervention and therapies and treatments and medicines that can prevent that. So people don't die just of a heart attack anymore. I mean, there are a few. We all have anecdotal evidence, but in terms of the statistics for our country, that's not how people die. They die in the hospital, or they die in hospice, or they die in some other kind of institution that we don't use our homes to die in anymore. Well, that changes the spiritual aspect of it. It changes the family dynamics of death. It changes the repercussions of death for those who are around and watch it. Just the emotional pain of seeing somebody kept alive on life support, which we couldn't have done 70 years ago, which is a very common experience now. To have somebody linger in a death phase for a long time on life support until their body just shrivels down, degenerates to sometimes 50, 60 pounds, and the people watch that, as opposed to you dying immediately and being gone and the family dealing with the shock and the grief and the trauma of it. But they, as I've seen in every death since I've been a pastor, the world keeps moving the day after the funeral. Everybody picks something up and keeps going somehow. But what if the death takes a year? And the last year of that person's life, you spend going to the hospital to see them every day for that year. Or it's your child or your spouse, and you spend every day seated next to them in that bed. What that does to you psychologically, what it does to you spiritually, what it does to your viewpoint of life, what it does to your relationships. That is the more common experience now. So to avoid some of those avoidable, long, drawn-out deaths, if that's not what you prefer, advanced directives can help you prevent that. So here's a few of them. Look on your sheet there. If a living will is another catch-all term, not really used in academia or maybe even legality anymore, but even at the conference I was at 2 weeks ago in Miami, they still said living will a few times. But a living will is a simple legal document that details your instructions about medical treatment for you should you become incapacitated. You can't write one for somebody else. It's a very personal document. Most of the concerns about living wills are based in the ambiguities and uncertainties involved with such terms as, what does terminal mean? That word terminal has morphed and changed over the 26 years I've been doing bioethics. What is artificial? That has also changed. What is ordinary? What's extraordinary? What those terms mean don't necessarily mean what you wrote down in your document 5-10 years ago. And some of those are actually being defined by state legislature. And they continue to upgrade and change some of the meanings, where they have different definitions and different parameters. What is extreme and what is radical? So 25 years ago, somebody would write down a living will, I don't want any extraordinary procedures taken. Well, that might have meant something in 25 years ago that doesn't mean the same thing now. Some of those definitions have broadened and some of them have narrowed. The problem with living wills, one of the main problems, is that you can't nail down what is meant by the document because you are not there to say it. They're having to read it and try to figure out, what did you mean? And then what did you mean might not matter at all if somebody wants to challenge it. Because then it will be, what do the lawyers say it means? So living wills can be in both a strange way constricting. The fear back in the 70s from Francis Schaeffer's book, How Shall We Then Live? His concern was that living wills were destroying the sanctity for life in America. That we were putting a cap on what was an acceptable life, and he was against living wills. And back in the mid 70s, as I read his arguments, they were very persuasive. And when I came to Sarasota, I was opposed to living wills. I thought, because of what Francis Schaeffer said, he made a very good point. We're saying life in the womb at some point is not worth living. Life outside the womb under certain conditions is not worth living. And now we're capping it off here, and we don't have the right to do that. But a lot of things have changed since those days. And I think if Francis Schaeffer was alive today, he would say that some of these documents are wise and are certainly within the Christian purview of what is a moral, ethical thing for you to do. The Florida Commission on Aging with Dignity used to distribute 5 wishes. I'm not sure if they still do. But it's a booklet that takes you through a step-by-step question process, so that you have a document that says Florida Living Will that's only 1 page long, but you have a booklet that goes with it that expresses your thoughts from different angles and different ways questions are asked, so that when they say you don't want anything extraordinary, in the booklet they can see what you think is extraordinary. So that helps a lot, but it still has its own limits and it's binding. I'm not sure that it is. The 5 wishes is not a legal document. It's an instructional booklet. It's an aid to understanding your living will, but it has no legal authority. It's an ethical consideration by those who are giving you medical care if they want to ponder that. The designation of a healthcare surrogate. Legally designating a healthcare surrogate provides greater flexibility than the usual living will, because it moves, it breathes, it adjusts to the situation. Let's say you write in 2018, I don't want to be resuscitated, because you know what it could do to your lungs and to your rib cage and your sternum, and you don't want all that to happen, you just want to go. But 4 years from now, they come up with a way to resuscitate you that doesn't involve crushing your chest and doing the compressions. They find another way to do it. If you didn't change your living will or your document, you couldn't incorporate the new technology. You'd be bound by that. And an argument could be made by the lawyers, who it always ends up going to, if there's a contest. No, it says, do not resuscitate. And what is that? That's a means of resuscitation, so we're not going to do it. But what you had in your mind was, you didn't want to be put into further suffering and pain and trauma by having your sternum cracked or your ribs fractured or your lungs traumatized, and this new procedure doesn't do that. So a healthcare surrogate can take all that in, knowing what you wanted, and then apply it to that. Even when the patient is suffering from long-term unconsciousness or permanent incapacitation, the surrogate is able to receive information, hold discussions with doctors and family members, and be aware of alternatives and new developments. In other words, a healthcare surrogate is not as much as a cookie cutter as a living will is. Cookie cutter, you stamp it out, and they all sort of look the same. A healthcare surrogate has 1 million alterations and faces to it, tailored to you. It is not uncommon for living wills, even those that go into great detail, to omit the one specific and unforeseen scenario being faced by the patient. Now, this is a true story. It's going to sound pharisaical, but I had been here about a year, and I was on the bioethics committee at the hospital, and we had a large bioethics conference at the University of South Florida, here on the campus down near Ringling School of Art. And there's about 500-600 people maybe, and they were discussing advanced directives, living wills, and the problem. And what had happened here, and I believe it was in Sarasota, but it was in this area, if not Sarasota, but somebody was in an ambulance that had a DNR, did not want to be resuscitated, and the ambulance had an accident and put the man into cardiac arrest. Well, the EMTs get there because the ambulance was just the driver, and the new EMTs get there. They come and they resuscitate the guy because the cardiac arrest was not due to the disease, it was due to an accident. And then that ambulance got up and got into another accident on the way to the hospital. So this man was treated twice in apparent opposition of his DNR, but the DNR was for his medical condition, not for having an accident. Well, that was now, and EMTs, emergency medical technicians, they're not legal professionals. When they get there, they're supposed to treat you. They don't have the time because, 1 minute could be life and death. 60 seconds of no oxygen could push you over that line where you can't be resuscitated healthily. So they've got to act. So they can't debate these legalities, but somebody is going to after the incident. And it was quite a situation here. It was people were flabbergasted by it, and then one of the EMTs was there in the room and told his perspective on it. And then the emotional duress he went through afterwards. In these situations, a living will document is almost meaningless in relation to its bearing on the patient's condition. If you decide to select a healthcare surrogate, you should keep some of these guidelines in mind. Number one, choose someone who knows you well enough to understand your beliefs. If your beliefs are based on your religious, spiritual, biblical viewpoint, they should understand that. If your beliefs are based upon your financial concerns or your family history, they should know that. If they know that you've told all your children under no conditions do I want to be resuscitated or put on life support, but the physicians believe, no, we can save this person. It might take us a couple of months, but we can save them. And the family doesn't want that and has been told, well, the healthcare surrogate needs to have that kind of personal information. If this is not possible, ask your physician or hospital about a values history, which is similar to the 5 wishes. That will help write that down, because if you don't have a healthcare surrogate, you don't have an advanced directive, a healthcare surrogate will be appointed to you. It'll be somebody. There's a hierarchy that begins with family and then dwindles down to a friend and then a court appointee. And it's not a real long list, but it's a list that gets further and further away from personal information about you, because somebody has to make a decision. Number 2, communicate your instructions clearly, discussing as many scenarios as possible so that your surrogate can face your situation with confidence and certainty. Now, in my case, this is what I have as a healthcare surrogate. My sister is the chief nurse for the Indian Health Service, and my brother is a retired DO. So I have 2 medical people who know far more than I will ever know about the human body and what happens at death. And I've told them what my wishes are and assigned them. They have the right to make the decision between the 2 of them. Either one of them on their own or 2 in conference. But they're medical professionals. I didn't have to sit down and go over all the different scenarios. You might need to. Choose someone who can address your needs dispassionately. That means not that they don't care, but that their emotions don't get cranked up and whether or not they're letting you go or they're holding you back. Because that colors the way the information is interpreted. When the doctor comes and says there's nothing more that we can do, but you as a child or you as a spouse are not ready to say goodbye, that there's nothing we can do means nothing to you. What do you mean there's nothing you can do? There's something you can do. I saw it on the internet, and this will do it. So you want them to think logically and dispassionately. And they won't hesitate to let go if that is what is the appropriate medical diagnosis or prognosis. A spouse, parent, or sibling may not be the best suited person. Now, normally you wouldn't have your brother or sister be your health surrogates, but because of their professional standing and what we've communicated back and forth, what we've experienced as a family, we all know what each other think and have no problem implementing that. Do not choose someone who is your beneficiary. And that's not a joke. It sounds funny, but that clouds the whole thing. I may love you, but if you go to heaven, I'm going to get $1 million. What's fun? Go see Jesus. I'll take the $1 million. Or, nor someone who will profit financially from your death. They're not a beneficiary, but they might in some way seize access to possessions or a business or something that you have. But they're not necessarily a beneficiary of an insurance policy. This could cloud their judgment, or, even if it doesn't, cause other people to question their judgment. See, all it takes is somebody out here who's not related to your family at all, who would say, wait a minute, that's the son, and he's getting $1 million. He can't think straight. I, as an interested party, am going to ask for an injunction to stop this. And it happened a lot in the 80s and 90s through the pro-life movement. And I knew some of the people who did it, who stepped in as completely outside, unconnected people, who filed a lawsuit or something, a court proceeding to stop the process that a family was going through in their mind to let their spouse go, but an outside party. Now, in my experience with that, even the best intentions in these outside parties, whether they're pro-life or not pro-life, they're driven by an agenda. And the agenda is rarely the person laying there in the bed. It's their calling. It's the precedent. And that all of a sudden tramples on your rights. That's why if you don't name a health care surrogate whose judgment can be beyond question to whatever degree that's possible, you could be setting them up to be challenged by a lawsuit and then have their life opened up in court as to what their true motives might be, and it could be torturous. Inform family members of your selection and of your wishes so that they don't dispute your surrogate. So if you name a surrogate and you don't tell your family, this is the man or this is the woman I've chosen, I've communicated this information to this person, they're going to make the call dispassionately, I want all you to go along with it. Family members who will automatically assume they know you better than that person does, if they're not able to let you go, will argue it. So it needs to be clearly communicated, and maybe even more than once. And I would say if you have a living will, an advance directive, or a healthcare surrogate, a designation, that document, more than you, should know where it is. Other people should know where this thing is found. I forgot to download those slides of the tattoos, because some of them are hilarious. But you can put your advance directive on your body. The computer chip on a chain is getting popular, where they can take that and pop it in, because the bracelets are not a binding document. The medical bracelets, if it says do not resuscitate or my healthcare surrogate is, all that is information. It's not a binding document. It means nothing in legality. But one of the men had, not only did he have do not resuscitate and had his signature tattooed on his chest, the reason why they didn't do it, he didn't have it dated. So there's aspects of legality that make something official. Now you would think, well, somebody who tattooed it on their chest, it's pretty obvious they don't want to be resuscitated. Except the other picture they showed us was of a young man, he was in his late 30s, who had it tattooed right across here where they would be attaching something. And it said, do not resuscitate, and it had a circle with a line through it, like put nothing here. Well, he did it because he lost a bet in a sorority drinking game. So he no longer had that viewpoint, but it was tattooed on him. So if nobody knew that was on his chest because he lost a bet in a fraternity drinking game, and the penalty was having that tattoo, do not resuscitate, they'd see that not resuscitating. When his real desire is, no, I want to keep living, I just happen to get drunk a lot. So that's why the history needs to be known, the personal nature of it. Number 6, keep your original document in a safe place and pass copies out to family members and physicians. It wouldn't hurt to get it notarized. It certainly needs to be witnessed. Now, if it's not in writing, a verbal expression can be legally binding if it's witnessed firsthand. Like I say to my brother, Hampton, if I am in a persistent vegetative state with no real feasible potential of coming out of it, don't put me on life support. And Jeff Bova walks by and hears it. And he says, well, I heard Pastor Dave say that to his brother Hampton. That doesn't count. It's got to be this person who heard it directly from my mouth to them. That can be legal if somebody actually can testify in court that they heard it, and they'll be questioned every which way from Sunday. And if they alter what they've said at all, it becomes meaningless too. The safest thing is to write it down. I'll tell you now, so what I've done, to me, the greatest way to secure my individual rights as a patient is a healthcare surrogate. And I picked the 2 that I think can do that. But that might not be available to you. So a DNRO, which is the Do Not Resuscitate Order, it is a physician's order. There's one on here for you. That's the designation of the healthcare surrogate. It's on the back. That's not a physician's order. That is just a legal document. That's a very boilerplate thing. You can get them at Staples. You can get them in any office supply store. It just says, in a case of my incapacitation or incompetence, this person has the right to make any medical decisions whatsoever. Medical power of attorney is very similar, but this is just for healthcare only. This person can't get into your finances and make financial decisions. But that doesn't have to be signed by a doctor. The DNRO, which I think is the one behind Florida Living Will, the DNRO or the DNR, that has to be signed by a physician because it is a physician's order. And it has to be, in Florida, it has to be yellow. If it's not yellow, it doesn't matter. It can be signed in blood with a picture of the physician signing it, and it's not going to count. It has to be yellow. It's just the color they chose for whatever reason. But if they can't find it, it doesn't matter. So many physicians suggest if you have one of these, you put it on your bed. You put it above your head on your bed at home. You have it somewhere where it's immediately noticeable when the EMTs rush in. Because they need to see that, no, don't touch them, because they're going to automatically do it. And then they're not going to go look for your DNRO. That's not their responsibility, is to find it. So, but that needs to be, that's a doctor's order. So you would take this, and your doctor probably has these on file, and ask your doctor, would you please fill this out or sign this for me? This is what I want. And then you have to have a copy kept with you. And there are forms of DNRs that are mobile or smaller, like postcard size. You can wear some on a chain in a plastic case around your neck if you're really that serious about not being resuscitated. But don't think the bracelet's going to do it. The bracelet tells the person you have a DNR. So the bracelets they were discussing with us at the conference this year, the ones they encouraged, is the one that says, do not resuscitate, order is in my wallet, order is in my purse. Don't put it in your safe, because who has the combination to your safe? The dead person or the dying person. Put it somewhere where it's accessible. That's the DNRO. And in some states, it's no longer called DNR, and most people don't even put the O on anymore. It's called an A&D. And I'm pretty sure the legislature is going to be presented in Florida here pretty soon to turn ours to an A&D, which is allow natural death, because it sounds less active or less heartless to say do not resuscitate than to say, no, they're dying, let them die. That patient has no problem. They're ready to go. So that's a document that will be. So why would you choose one of those? Well, after resuscitation, however, severe limitations in brain damage often remain. And that's all based upon what made you have a cardiac arrest, how old you were, was it a traumatic event or was it a prolonged disease? All those things affect the recovery status you'll have after you've been resuscitated. The physicians and the doctors and the nurses will know that information. And you might want to have one if you know you have a disease. I had a dear friend who died of ALS, and he had a DNR. Not because he wanted to die. He just knew being resuscitated was not going to bring him any chance of healing or add any more to his life. So this was a young man. He was my age. We were school buddies and baseball buddies, and his best friend of mine is the chief of police of the town, and he was totally immobile from here down. And he lived a long time. If I remember correctly, it was 7 or 8 years. And ALS often takes people, within months to 2 years, they're gone. Everybody who was in his first, you don't want to call it class, but the support group or those who were first receiving treatments, they had all come and died. He had been to all their walkathons. He had been to all their fundraising things. Everybody he started with were all dead. And he continued to live. And more people came in and died. So I got to the point where he was immobile from here, and that means your lungs. It's not that you're paralyzed. It means your organs aren't working, and you can't catch your breath, and it's suffocation. If you go that long, that phase, and your organs haven't shut down and killed you, eventually you can no longer breathe. So you get morphine shots, and the morphine eases that pain. But there is no cure for ALS, so you know you're going to die. And if you have a cardiac arrest, and if it could be in your mind, that's relief. My struggle's over. Why would you resuscitate me to live like this any further? Well, that was where my friend had gotten, and his condition was so bad. He took some little extra morphine the last time he had to have it, and was not resuscitated. And he went home to be with. He was a good Christian guy, loved the Lord. His pastor, he had informed his pastor of what his wishes were. But because he knew what would be after being resuscitated, so if you can, that can be discerned in your situation, you should probably consider a DNRO. In the situations in which a patient is resuscitated after suffering cardiac arrest and irreversible brain damage, some form of unconsciousness usually follows, and often long-term. So that's the healthcare surrogate. Do not resuscitate. The Florida Living Will, all these are called advanced directives. And again, an advanced directive, it can be a verbal communication, not necessarily writing, but verbal ones are awful hard to defend. And the most difficult one, and this sounds so inappropriate or so out of context to tell young people to communicate this, but in the times I've been in bioethics, there's been at least 5 women who have been declared brain dead while they're pregnant. And the struggle then was for the physicians and the family, and if they were believers, their church. What, do we take them off life support when there's a living baby inside? What's the pro-life perspective? And does the pro-life perspective and agenda override the individual will of that person? As a staunch pro-lifer, I have an original stance I take on it, what I think. But when I've heard the stories and the duress the family goes through, I'm not sure I have the right to make that determination for that family. And I've had a chance to meet some of them. And in some situations, you would say, well, I think the family is clearly wrong, but in some situations, they might be wrong, but don't they have the right to do that? And the one I was thinking of was a lady from Texas just about 5 years ago. And her and her husband had this conversation that if I happen, because it had happened before, and they had heard the story, if I'm pregnant and I declared brain dead, don't put me on life support. Let the baby go with me. And the husband knew that. The husband was in love with his wife. They weren't married more than 4 or 5 years, and he was in love with her. She got in a car accident, had severe brain damage, and while she's in the hospital, she is not declared PVS or coma, it's brain death, where there's just nothing but a flat line. There's never there's no documented recovery from that ever in medical history. So she was declared brain dead. The man immediately said, take her off life support. That is her wishes, that is my wishes, and we're prepared for that spiritually. They were devout Catholics, which is what made this thing turn nasty, because they were devout Catholics. When the Catholic Church heard of it, they ordered an injunction to prevent that from happening. It happened to happen in the state of Texas, and the state of Texas is a very pro-life state legislature. They initiated an injunction to stop this process. So here you have a husband who's in love with his wife, having to go to court for months, fighting for the right to take his dead wife off life support because she is dead, and let the baby go too, because that was her wishes. I'm honoring the wife that I love. I'm not inventing this. This is what she wanted. This is what she's... How can you not have sympathy for that struggle? And I, as a pro-lifer, and often maybe 15 years ago, I would have stuck my nose into that, and I would have said what you should or shouldn't do. I pulled back and thought, who am I to tell this man what he has to do about his wife and his baby? But then, theoretically, outside of that, if somebody doesn't stand up for the sanctity of life, the sanctity of life just dissipates. So, there's a fine line there. The trouble was, they didn't have anything in writing. If they would have had it in writing, it would have circumvented some of it. It still would have been a religious, philosophical debate, but legally it could have been done. And I think I mentioned here before, the first case I saw of it was in Brockport, New York, not far from where I was in Buffalo, where a woman had a car accident. She wasn't married, but she was pregnant. And her car flipped on the side of the road and her face, she landed unconscious in a pool of water. So her nose and her mouth were under the water, and she was unconscious, couldn't pull herself out. Well, she drowned. Well, the EMTs get there, they pull her out of the water, and they resuscitate her, because they have no idea how long she's been there. And the water temperature, the air temperature, all that comes into play as to how long you can go without oxygen coming to your brain. If you want to drown, the best place to drown is in freezing cold water, because you can go a long time, they can resuscitate you and you not be severely brain damaged. But if you drown in a Florida lake, you're done. It's not going to take long. Your brain starts to decay, within minutes of the oxygen supply. Anyway, they resuscitated her. Her heart was pumping. She had brain activity. They took her to the facility where she remained for a while. And then she went brain dead. And the doctors there would not take her off life support, although New York state law at that time, I don't know if it's the same now, requires anybody who's been declared brain dead to be immediately taken off life support. These doctors did not. It became a huge case. The parents of the woman, they sued to have her taken off life support, saying, we don't want this baby. It will remind us of our precious daughter, that she died in a horrific way, and let the baby go too. The father of the child, who wasn't married, he filed for a court order to have the woman removed from life support, because he didn't want responsibility for this baby, and the doctors would not do it. And their idea was, if we can keep her alive just long enough, we can deliver the baby through cesarean, and we can save this baby. But legally, that wasn't their call to make. Ethically and morally, and in their minds, spiritually, yes, it was. Because we have two patients here. We have a woman and a baby. So they overstepped legal bounds. The New York State Supreme Court got involved. The case strung out just long enough when they got to, I forgot what week it was, but it was just like a couple of days past what they considered to be viability, maybe 21, 22 weeks. And they delivered the baby cesarean, and they unplugged the life support, and the woman died instantly. And the father and the parents, the grandparents of the baby, had both said, if that baby's born, we want nothing to do with it. That was their threat and their challenge. But the grandparents were there, who are really the parents of the girl, to say goodbye And when they saw the baby, they fell in love. And they adopted the baby as their own. So the story ends up nice in that kind of weird way, that the baby was loved and the grandparents got it. But it raises a bunch of questions. Does the state have the right to step in? Does a hospital or doctors who have a different belief system have the right to step in that? Would you want that done to you? Would you want somebody to impose that on you? All those are legitimate questions that people didn't have to answer 100 years ago, because the woman would have been dead and the baby would have died. These are ethical, moral questions that generations before us did not have to really struggle with. There are some double intent, mercy killing, mercy treatments, where if your intent is not to kill the patient, but to relieve the suffering, but relieving the suffering brings about their death, then relieving the suffering is okay. The Catholic Church has cited that, if not decades, maybe 100 years ago. Catholic Church was way ahead of everybody else in the philosophical studies of all these kind of things. And they decided that it is not morally unacceptable and it is not ethically unacceptable to administer pain-killing medicine that shortens somebody's life if it's to relieve their suffering. If, in your heart, you're giving it to them to kill them, then it is wrong. So it all goes to what your intent is. And that has become sort of an accepted guideline in bioethics, that it is the intent. If your intent is to relieve suffering, it's okay. And you know who does that? Does it every day. And they're honored, revered institutions all across the region. Hospice. Hospice treats suffering because it's not curative. It's palliative care. And so their philosophy is, you come into hospice, we're going to do nothing to cure you, but we're going to make you as comfortable as we can and relieve your suffering, so as the natural death process goes, you can be as aware and conscious as possible and spend time with your family. About 30 years ago, that was considered, in Christian circles, barbaric, cruel. What do you mean you don't try to cure? But that has really flipped in the last 30 years, where Christians and Christian communities have funded hospices and are fully behind it, because it makes it personal and makes it spiritual again. I've been to a number of deaths at the hospices here, where you go into the room and the family's all sitting there, the person's sitting up in bed and they're talking. They know they're dying. They know they could die at any minute, but they're aware. They're not feeling any pain because they're given enough medicine to reduce the pain but not diminish the consciousness. And so they're with their family. I walked in one room where the woman died just 2 days later, where the granddaughter was sitting on her bed and they were playing a board game. Well, imagine that granddaughter, the memory she'll have. I got to be with grandma right before she died, because they were giving her pain medicine that was killing her. Because morphine knocks a day. Not every dose is a day, but you take morphine, it's doing this to your life. It's lopping off, it's shaving off days or hours. The more morphine you take, the faster it shaves it off. So if you're taking morphine, so that here's your death, and if you take nothing, you're going to crash right there. You take morphine, you're going to crash right here, but you're not going to be in pain, and you'll be able to communicate with your family. That's now considered compassionate, ethical care. And I can't say that I disagree with it. In the deaths that I've seen, they have been beautiful scenes of family holding hands, singing hymns, praying, or whatever that family likes to do, rather than the patient being locked up on life support and unconscious because of extraordinary procedures being done. I would recommend you, before you make any decision, go visit a hospice and ask, is there a family in there who wouldn't mind you talking with them? Or a patient. They are, in my opinion, beautiful facilities, very Christ-like approach, sort of the way death used to be, where it was a family event and not someplace far off with everybody wearing white coats and those white fluorescent lights and everything in stainless steel, but it's a nice, comfortable bed with a couch and a TV. I think it makes the death experience more organic and more natural. But that would be up to you. But I'd say go visit one and see. Now, we got about 15 minutes. We don't have to take the whole 15 minutes. But anybody have any questions or comments I can answer from whatever level of knowledge that I might have, but yes.
I don't know how many of you know, but I'm a professional guardian, and when I get assigned to someone, first thing I do is I look for my advance directive, and I look for a tax return. Don't hide those things, because a lot of times I'll get to somebody, and they really don't have a mind that they can talk to me. But I always try to talk to my people, and kind of use that 5 wishes kind of thing. You know, what do you want? And I've had one man that said, yes, I want to be brought back. And everybody else has all said, let me go. But it's good for me to know early on what your wishes are. And unless I have this stuff, I'm going to have to make decisions, because my highest standard is substituted judgment. And that means I have to kind of know you. And without having that, it's what's in your best interest. And that could be anything. So make sure you have these things. I'm serious.
By the way, Ellie is a great resource. If you want to have a personal conversation with somebody who's got a lot of experience, she'd be great for that. But you brought up that term. I want to clarify for you, substituted judgment. It doesn't mean that person gets to substitute what they think is right for you. It means they are supposed to know what you think is right, and they are your substitute to make your call, sort of like a healthcare surrogate. But substituted judgment is usually somebody who's appointed by the court. A healthcare surrogate is somebody that you choose. And they both are just as viable, but you can see if she's in a room or just meets you or just assigned to you, she's going to have limited information available. But her call is not to make a decision based upon what she thinks the Word of God tells her or her faith tells her, but it's to make a decision based upon what your values were. So imagine you have and I got to say, in my dealings in the bioethical world, almost everybody who's involved in it is involved in it for altruistic reasons. They have the very best of intentions. They're not vampires out there to steal your organs, and or they just love to see death. The people who are involved in, whether it's court appointee, substituted judgment, officials, officers, they're in that because they care and they want to do what's right. They want to make sure that you have done what's right. Now, outside in the industry world, are there black market organ thing? Yes. Are there people who can slap down $30,000 and move up an organ donation line? Yes, that's the real world. There are laws against it, but there's laws against a lot of things that happen every single day. But I think you can trust that most of the people who are involved in that have the best intentions in mind, and communication is always a key. Yes, Brooke? Well, if the brain death is not then compensated for by life support, the heart and lungs will eventually stop and the baby will die. So, because brain death shuts down all the messages that are telling the heart to pump and the lungs to breathe. But if they're put on life support, the heart and the lungs can continue indefinitely. So as long as... Yeah, I don't think very many facilities would do it if you're only 2 months. But if you're 3 or 4 months, they would consider it, because it's very expensive. It could be a couple $100,000 to keep you on life support. Somebody's got to pay that bill, whether it's the state or the facility or your family. So they would factor that in, like how much is this going to cost, how long is it going to take. But let's say you were 1 month pregnant. If your body keeps functioning, the baby will keep growing. Yeah. But if your brain dies, your body needs artificial assistance to keep functioning. But that's the scary thing, and I can't say any names, but very well-respected surgeon in the area, in a meeting I was in just last month, said he is frightened now about how long we can keep a dead body functioning. And he said he doesn't think that current medical students have any grasp of the finality of death or the ethical line you can't cross by keeping a dead body alive for, and he used the word indefinitely, and then he stopped and said, years. And you remember the movie, I think it's back in the 80s, the movie Coma, where they had people suspended on electrical wires. They were dead, but their bodies, they were farming. People were getting their organs off them, and they were being kept alive just for that. Well, there's a valid reason. If I'm going to be an organ donor and I have a healthy heart, but I need to be kept alive for 2 days so that person can be prepared to receive my heart, that's a logical thing, but do I want to be kept alive for a year so somebody can get my heart? And I say the word kept alive, that's it's sort of a misnomer. My body kept functioning for a year. I don't think I would want that. And by the way, one more thing, and then we'll probably, unless you have another question. On your driver's license, it marks you as an organ donor. When I first got here in Florida, you made that choice. They asked you. Now it's an assumed consent, unless you say, I don't want to be an organ donor. So if you have a Florida driver's license and you didn't already designate at some point in time, you want to keep all your organs with you when you die, you have presumed consent in Florida, if I understand the law correctly, that it's automatic unless you say don't. Now, there are many people who believe that's a violation of spiritual things for my heart to be taken and put in somebody else. Because we have all heard the stories that when somebody has a heart transplant, their personality changes. So we don't know, does the personality go along with the heart? There's questions. People have questions about that. And there's some freaky stories about it. But you might want to keep your heart with you. It's going to turn to dust, but you might. That's your call to make. If you don't want it to be ripped out of your body and taken somewhere, so you might want to check your driver's license and see if it doesn't bother you, then it doesn't bother you. I look at death as being pretty final here on earth. It's not going to matter where I'm buried. It's not going to matter what happens to my body. I know where I'm going to be. And if my body was burned at the stake into a little cup of ashes and then it was sprinkled all over Germany to get rid of my life, when God resurrects me, it's going to be instantaneous. It's no challenge for God to resurrect you if a shark ate you, if a bear ripped you to pieces, if you got burned by the stake, or if you donated your heart and your liver and your kidney. That's all easily within God's ability to resurrect your body and give you a new one. But personally, I can understand why you wouldn't want that, and your children might not want it. You got to remember, if your heart or your lung or your kidney is taken out of your body and given to somebody else, there's people who survived you who know that. That guy's walking around with my dad's kidney. That could cause problems. So whatever it is you want to do, I'd say talk with your family. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir. Well, I can't pinpoint, or I can't divulge any information I have on that, but I would say yes. Organs are sometimes removed, because, well, he's going to die in the next hour or two, so we can get the organ right now, and it's fresh, and the other person's right over there and needs it. Yeah, that happens, but it's not without the consent of the patient or the consent of the family. No, the EMTs don't even have that power or the authority, but it'll be a facility, and there's protocols to protect all that. But if you say, hey, if I'm going and somebody's life's going to be saved, you can cut the last 2 hours out of my life. But I don't think they won't do that unless you're like totally unconscious. There's no way. But then that's a fuzzy thing, because I'm sure everybody here has heard the stories of people being in a coma. And they wake up and they say, I heard everything you said for the last 6. We've all heard those stories. So when is unconsciousness really unconscious? Is it PVS? Is it coma? We know it's brain death, only because no one's ever come back. Maybe they can hear, but they can't tell you because they don't come back. But comas, they do. I think I mentioned to you a few weeks ago, the longest one in America in history was 37 years in a coma and woke up. Imagine that. You get injured, you go to sleep, you wake up, and you got grandkids running around. What that would just do to you. PVS you don't tend to come back from, but people have, but not as often as comas. Comas, the odds are you go into a coma, you're going to come out of it, but that happens in the first 4 weeks, the most always ones. The longer it goes, the more your chances drop. The younger you are, the chances are higher. The older you are, your chances drop. If the coma is because of an injury, your chances are higher. If it's because of disease, your chances are lower. So all of that is what the experts know, the medical professionals know. And just as long as you communicate what your real wishes are, that if I get resuscitated, if I get put on life support, my intent is that I will be restored to a full life. That's what I want. If you guys can pull that off, go for it. But if it's a roll of the dice or a coin toss, that I'm going to be unconscious the rest of my existence, let me go. You need to make sure that's communicated, because somebody will decide. Yes, ma'am.
I've read and heard about in the Netherlands how the doctors sometimes make decisions to take a person's either, I don't know if it's necessarily out of life support, but they're the ones making the decision. Could that happen here eventually?
Yes, and she's talking about a study in the Netherlands, this is probably 15, 20 years ago, which they made assisted physician suicide legal in the Netherlands. Well, in less than 5 years, they had enough documentation to show that a huge percentage of the patients who were euthanized were done so without their consent. Now, that doesn't mean that these were murderers who were people were making medical decisions that, the quality of their life isn't very good, we'll euthanize them. Because when people are given certain power, they tend to always take that power to whatever length they can and cross a few lines. That's just human nature. So that's a classic study that was often used in the arguments in the United States on those states that are allowing physician-assisted suicide, that often the physician will be the one to decide if somebody's euthanized or not. And there's always that gray area. Well, yeah, the medical world is a lot like the military world. We find out long after what's going on that it's been going on. The public doesn't learn things until after certain barriers have been crossed for quite a while. It's the innovators and the pioneers and the boundary pushers who are doing things such as human cloning. Guarantee you it's taking place right now. Just not fully successful that we know of, but you know when we're going to know it? When somebody turns 18 years old who was cloned. That's when we'll hear it. Until then, we won't know. But somebody's doing it. And that's true on every advancement in technology. That kind of stuff takes place. That doesn't mean that every physician knows all that. It means that the people who are doing the research and the testing, there's a whole bunch of there's a whole ethical realm that controls that research and development. There's ethics on that. Because we as a species are innately unethical. We need imposed ethics on us for some reason. And in a weird way, that's what advances our knowledge, but it's also what puts us at risk. Think about the knowledge in the Garden of Eden that was secured by eating that fruit. It was knowledge we didn't have, but it was knowledge with a terrible result. But it was knowledge that was acquired, because the human desire to know what it doesn't know. We really drifted off there. Well, it's 7:30. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll close this off. Father, we do thank you that we have the opportunity to talk about this difficult, controversial, even sometimes frightening subject matter. And I pray that each person who came tonight and those who are watching live stream will be able to logically consider the information, see what is best for them and their family. And we do pray that none of us here will have to go through that horrific scenario in which a death is prolonged and ethically challenging, where we have to make decisions that make us feel guilty before you and uncertain that we're even doing the right thing. But to the degree that we can have certainty and knowledge and understanding, may you grant us that. And we ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless.